Futurecasting is an action in the Cape Town resilience strategy. There is a need, particularly in this world of rapid climate change, urbanization, globalization, and technological change, for partners in any urban environment to understand those changes and to think about how those changes may affect the urban environment going forward. We are in the midst of a global pandemic at the moment, which has fundamentally shifted the way we work. And it's very likely, and I think we'll probably hear that today, that there will be as well a legacy of this pandemic when it passes, whenever that may be. And it's certainly likely that the pandemic will taper and probably go through some peaks for at least this year and most of next year as well. And it's important for us to start thinking about what the legacy of this pandemic will be. There will certainly be both good and bad legacies, and there's an opportunity here to leverage as much as possible that is good about what we have learned. Resilience is a guiding principle of the IDP of the City of Cape Town. It refers to our collective ability as a city that's inclusive of business, households, government, academia, civil society, to be able to both survive and then also to adapt and ultimately to thrive, irrespective of the chronic stresses or acute shocks that we experience. And so Futurecasting is really an attempt to collaborate and to share. This is the first event, as I noted, focusing more on the changing nature of work. I hope that everyone finds it interesting. I think that this area of work has major consequences for a lot of topics in the urban environment, including traffic congestion, climate change, energy efficiency, productivity, and a range of other topics. Thank you once again to the EDP for hosting this event. Selwyn, I'm going to pass back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Before I hand over to our moderator, Andrew, can I ask, just from a logistics point of view, to please keep your microphones muted and your video switched off. We'll only have the video feed of the moderator and the speakers, and this will help to keep a stable connection for the duration of this Futurecasting event. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Andrew Borain. Andrew is the CEO of the EDP. I'm sure no stranger to many of you. Andrew, I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Selwyn. Good morning, everyone. Nice to have you all on a bright and cheerful Monday morning. And Gareth, thank you for this opportunity to do this project with the city. It's very exciting. And, Gareth, you talked about resilience equipping us to deal with both the stresses and the shocks. And obviously through the pandemic, we've seen physical disruption to our way of life and our way of doing business. But we've also seen crisis as a disruption to business as usual, the conventional way of doing things. And it has challenged our conventional wisdoms and our mindsets and our attitudes and our behavior and our emotional states as much as our physical states. So we've got 4 great speakers this morning. Zakiswa is from the City of Cape Town. Anne is from a company called Dive, which deals with young leadership development and alternative learning environments. Pumi, when hopefully she joins us, she's the general manager of enterprise applications at Distel, and Sheila Goodwin is the general manager human resources at Media24. So incredible panel. And I've asked them each just to spend 10 minutes reflecting on the changing nature of work and the places of work, what has changed, and in a sense, what do we learn from the crisis? What do we want to go back to when the crisis is over? And what don't we? What part of business as usual do we want to jettison and look at things permanently in a completely new way? That's a very exciting topic because, as Gareth said, it affects, the shape of our city, transport arrangements, the physical nature of where people work, how they work, and also what we do about people who are not working. And let's just be mindful that 160,000 people in the Western Cape have lost their jobs through the crisis of the last 10 months. So there's huge amounts of shocks and stresses to families and households throughout our region and throughout our country. So I'd like to start off with you, Zukiswa. I think you've got a couple of slides, and I just please ask each of you doing an input. Let's stick to the 10 minutes so that we've got time at the end for questions and discussions and feedback. Those of you who are on this call, please start responding through the chat function, which is at the bottom, so that we can pick up on your issues ahead of time and that everyone can see what you're putting out there, and we can then open it up to the speakers at the end, as well as everyone to comment and be part of this discussion. So don't feel you have to wait till right at the end. Start using that chat function, and then we'll get to the blue, it's now a yellow hand function under reactions towards the end. But Zukiswa, can we start with you, please?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for the invitation, and certainly looking forward to sharing the City of Cape Town's views and how we responded to the pandemic and what our future of work looks like. I've just prepared a couple of slides, and it's just really pointers that I think do demonstrate how we have approached the future of work within the city environment. So when the pandemic hit us, for us it was not about we were waiting for something to be a catalyst for great work that we needed to do. We were already busy, and we were responding already to some of the changes that were already happening, which were rapid, which were disruptive, and were already hitting us and the world wide in general. And we're talking about technological breakthroughs. Those were there already, and they needed us to respond as a city. The shifts in economic powers, the demographic shifts, rapid urbanization already has been spoken to in the introduction, and resource scarcity and climate change. So already those were hitting us, and who can forget, you know, when we had the water scarcity that happened, and at that time the drought was one of those climate, I think, a change that forced us to think differently. So when we looked at future of work, it was not necessarily just to respond to the pandemic, but it was more to say, how do we future-proof the city for future and any other shocks and stresses that might come our way? So we see our response as future-proofing, and hence well, some of the elements I'm going to speak to talks about how we adapt currently, but also how do we post-pandemic ensure that we don't lose any of the benefits that we've gotten through this process. In the next slide, it's really just a summary of some of the programs we were already running when the pandemic hit us. And all of them were meant exactly to really position us and modernize our city as a government sphere. And some of them included the work we had already done in the tech space. We had started our journey in terms of ICT, where we were looking at our core applications, looking at our legacy systems, and asking ourselves, are they responsive to the customer needs? And how do we ensure that we build or bring or get the capability of systems that are necessarily responding to the customer needs? We had already started a journey within our people space, where we were looking at how do we improve our HR service delivery. Again, the whole aim was to ensure that we've got an HR service that is responsive to where the organization is at, and how does it ensure that it adapts and it's agile to where the organization wants to be. We had already started a journey around our data strategy, and on the customer space, quite a lot of great work already having been begun at the time, which was about really creating an environment where we are able to have a single integrated customer center for our citizens. So a lot of these programs, when the pandemic hit, were en route. And in the next slide, when we compared what the trends were telling us in terms of where the future of work was going and where we were, we could have been just complacent and say, well, we're on the right track, and let's just continue and do what we were doing. But no, that was not how we saw it. It was an opportunity to put an additional lens. So the next slide talks about some of the questions that we needed to respond to now above and beyond the modernization that we were talking to. And some of the questions that we were responding to included how do we ensure that as an organization we have a lasting and a positive legacy post the pandemic, and how do we seize the opportunities that the pandemic brought to us? How do we adapt swiftly in order to survive and thrive ultimately? How do we improve our efficiencies and outcomes? How do we ensure that whatever we do, that we provide that high quality and affordable services to the residents? And we could only respond that through obviously a coordinated approach. So a recovery program within the city was established, which had two parts to it. One part was really around ensuring we respond to the crisis, but the other part looked at how do we adapt and rebuild post the pandemic. So the future of work, which we are driving currently, speaks to the people, the process, the technology, and the org design aspect of the organization. And we've categorized that work within the three buckets of work itself, and workforce and workplace. And I'll just talk a little bit around what those three categories are, because that's where most of the critical thinking went into, and a lot of intelligence from the leadership and as well as the organization-wide brought quite a lot of insights for us to work within that space. So the next slide, I think, summarizes some of the questions I've already spoken to, which we were responding to. And I think they tie in nicely with what we are doing today, which is really just sharing the thought processes of all the organizations around how they approached the future of work, but also what lessons can we learn that we can take forward? What should we be seizing as an opportunity and be able to ensure that whatever we do, we deliver value to the customers? And that's what, as the city, we responded to. Let me just talk deeply, swiftly now around the three buckets of how we approach the future of work and how our efforts are organized into these three categories. So in the next slide, we looked at the three categories, all interconnected and all taking us through around what a future of work would look like for the city as an organization, and ultimately delivering that value to the customer. So on the first component, we're looking at work itself. Here we're interrogating ourselves as an organization to say, we need to take another lens in how we work. We need to look at where are the opportunities for us to improve, to be more efficient, to be more responsive to customers, to ensure that we are resilient in our processes, we are resilient in our business models, and also to ensure that they meet the customer needs. So a lot of great work is happening in that space to again put another lens around what have we learned during the pandemic, how we operate, how we deliver the services that we can keep, and what have we learned that has given us an opportunity to be able to shift how we do things. So there's a work that's happening in there is really driven from a business improvement perspective. And the aim is really to ensure we optimize, we automate, we integrate as much as we can. And then the second category in which we are focusing most of our efforts is the people space. The pandemic hit us, and organization obviously were all impacted differently. The most aspect of what was impacted was the people within those organizations. So how do we ensure that as we adapt and creating processes and systems to adapt, we build back better an employee that is resilient, but also an employee that is future-proofed in terms of the skills that they have, but also the capacity and the capability that the organization needs from them and that they can deliver. So in that space, quite a lot of our work focuses on the culture of the organization. The pandemic has taught us that whatever we thought we had, we needed to have a real look in terms of whether was it sufficient. It was no longer enough for us as leaders within the people space to think we've got the culture, we've been building it, and it is now sustainable and resilient. But we needed to look at how do we curate a culture that is responding to where we are at now. If you think about it, if you look into the literature, you'll have a lot and lots of definition about what the culture is. But for me, the one that resonates to me as a manager and a leader is by Bernard Marr, who says that the best way to describe an organizational culture is that it is the experience your employees have working for you in your team, whether they're working remotely or in the office. The experience they have for them, that's the organizational culture. So how do I ensure as a leader, I am curating that in responding to where we are at, remote working being the biggest part of where we are at now, but how do I ensure I create that balance? And how do I ensure that the leadership culture that I create within the space in which I manage, in which I lead, does yield an employee experience, which in the end creates that customer experience that we want. And I think when as leaders, we always have that in mind, that however I'm leading and managing will create an experience for the employee, and ultimately the customer will be the recipient of whatever that employee experience is. I think it makes us quite being ensure that we are intentional in how we lead. The one aspect that we cannot put aside, you talked about it, unemployment. And in our case, we have a responsibility towards about 26,000 employees. And how do we ensure that these employees continue to thrive in their current in the current environment to the skills they have, but into the future? How do we ensure that we reskill, we upskill them to be ensure that they continue to deliver services beyond the pandemic? An example in the case of the city where our work and the technology disruptions, we're very mindful around them not necessarily impacting the employees negatively. How do we ensure that where we found opportunities for technology to enable the work better or to be able to optimize or automate, but not lose the value of the employee still providing a service? An example is our water meter readers. There's a great opportunity and where technology as well as upskilling and reskilling can work very, very well together. We've got a group of employees who currently go out there and, you know, take the reading out of a meter. They walk and they brave all the elements. But with an introduction of a smart meter, the necessity for them to walk out there and be able to go and take the reading won't be there, won't be necessary at all. But what you would have is really where the data can be transported, you know, obviously electronically, and the city can get that reading. But we can upskill that employee to be able to contribute to the city by interpreting the data, by working with the data, and ensure that we are absolutely to derive value from it. So it's an opportunity to integrate the two without losing or creating, I think, an environment where the employee no longer has a job. So all of the great work, I mean, in the workplace itself, the last category in there, we talk about how do we ensure that we enable the organization to work remotely, but we also look at the space that we have, and we're talking about our office space. How do you optimize it in such a way that where we spend quite a lot of amounts of money into the leases, how do we ensure we reduce that? But on the other hand, how do we ensure that there's viability in the spaces that we create? Because we still want to maintain that balance between remote working and create that physical space for the employees to work. So quite a lot of great work went into that, and all of that aimed at ensuring that the remote working culture that is emerging, where out of our 26,000 employees, we've got 18,000 already, which are office-based and currently are working up to a certain percentage in terms of remote working. How do we ensure that we keep the balance between that 18,000 and those that are in the field and that are in the service? They don't feel as if future of work is only about, you know, remote working, but ensuring that digitization, as I've talked about, modernization programs, all of that improves how they do their job, improves their safety and improves their well-being. So just some of the thoughts. I'm mindful of time. I don't want to really take much of it, but some of these are just some of the thoughts that for us have been key in how we approached what we did. And just one last one is the journey that we are on now is really just focusing on key elements in terms of the change drivers that we have, which are driving what we do, which is the optimization of service delivery, productivity, and employee well-being. So our very first focus at the moment is on employee wellness. And there's quite a lot of work that's going in there to ensure that we provide that service and ensure that we are supporting employees to be able to embrace what is happening, but also continue to be productive in the space that they're in. And all the other work in the slides that I think will be circulated to everyone else, it really is about some of the key principles that we use and some of the key roadmap that we've put for ourselves to just ensure that by at least we've given ourselves that by June 2021, we want to have achieved all of those great elements. There's about 8 of them that we're focusing on. I think let me stop now. I'm mindful of the time that I've taken and then see what comes up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kiswe. That's spot on time. And thank you for, in a sense, the comprehensive integrated approach. I really like the connection between work, workforce, and workspace. I think it's a good way of looking at it. And also thank you for raising that point about the tensions that can creep in to this process if we only focus on the office-based workforce as opposed to the frontline workers or the service workers or the people out in the field, and how you've got to have that holistic integrated approach. So thank you for that. I'm sure we'll come back to that point just now. Can I go straight on to Anne?
Got to find that mute button, which always takes a while. Thanks, Andrew. So, I mean, Andrew introduced me in my sort of role as Dive, which is a company that looks at equipping students for future world of work. But actually, I think what is most relevant, I spend most of my workday at the waterfront in something called Solve at the Waterfront, which the waterfront has just launched in terms of its Building Back Better approach. And really the focus of DIVE is to look at city making and how we build back better. And there are 26,000 people that work in the waterfront every day in a pre-COVID world. So obviously, future world of work in the context of both ourselves as a waterfront company, but well as our tenants, and what you have to do. In a sense, we're a neighborhood of a city, which is this weird place because it's privately owned but public access, and we have a bit of an ability to innovate. So what is being required of us as landlords in this, and as sort of city makers, micro city makers, in the context that we found ourselves. So I wanted to focus my input very much sort of at 3 levels, and to focus mainly on the impact of the pandemic. Because was completely right. I mean, there was already major shift with digital transformation, with inequality challenges that were happening, and in the nature of the work that people do, which is captured in, equipping for future skills, trying to retain jobs, and really what we do around cultures of agility and learning. But I'm going to focus my input really on the impact of the pandemic. So if I kick off with what our research across our tenants is showing, as well as the global research that we have done, I think the first thing that I want to emphasize is that this is a granular issue. When we speak about working from home, it's not a one size fits all, and I think that that's absolutely imperative to emphasize. When people say people would prefer to work from home, I mean, firstly, that's excluding a huge chunk of people for whom that's not even an option, or who are unemployed. I think the second issue to bear in mind that within those people, there's granularity. So young people who haven't had the experience of work, who are needing to learn by osmosis, who haven't had that peer relationships, there's much more of a grouping there that would prefer to be in the office. It's certainly not the majority. The majority of people would prefer to continue to work from home to some extent. The second issue is that women are impacted in different ways. So there's a gender issue here that's very important to remember, especially women with children at school, or children not at school, and the complexity that's happened, and in our country, gender-based violence. So there's an age issue, there's a gender issue, and then there's the type of work that you're doing. The inequality issue comes in terms of the biggest issue in the surveys is whether you have connectivity at home and whether you have a separate workspace, whether you have a dining room table or a separate office space. If you're having to work in your bed, you're sharing a room with 5 other people, you want to get back to work. So all of these issues need to be taken into account. And then the other thing is the type of work, which comes to the future of office. Because if you look at the type of work done, people are finding that if it requires concentration, if it requires efficiency, if it requires having efficient meetings, all of those things are much better in the home space. But actually, and I read, and I think the research must be divided because I read your invite, a lot of what we've seen is that innovation is actually not best from home. Innovation that requires multifaceted inputs and systemic inputs is not necessarily best from home. Building culture is much more complex from home. Engaging with your clients in a particular way is much more complex from home. So there's also an issue about what is the future purpose of office in the context of that kind of research that is emerging, and how do you deal with the very real inequality that this is actually emphasizing. So if I look in the context of the waterfront company itself, because we're similar to you, a lot of our people had to be there because we run a precinct. There wasn't ever the choice. Our executive team made the call in the context of that they themselves would spend most of the time there. They didn't feel that it was equal if they didn't. Now that doesn't have to be the case, and they never forced anyone to come in, but they were there. And it's very difficult not to be there if your executive team are there. So it took a particular approach. I think the other thing that was different about the Waterfront Company is deep, deep knowledge of how to keep the safe space, because they're having to do it across the precinct. And so keeping our space safe and the lack of sort of paranoia, so to speak, around that has been, I think, a symptom of what we have done. I think if you then get into sort of our tenants, now we obviously have small businesses, we have micro and small businesses, we have a lot of co-working spaces, and then we have the very, very big tenants, all of whom are grappling. I mean, all of whom are on the jobs of the future space and how you change your culture and your processes. But in terms of grappling with this, I would love to sit here, Andrew, and say to you that there's been a uniform approach, but I can't. So what we have found amongst the really, really big players, I mean, if you think who sits in our space, we've got EY, we've got PwC, we've got Deloitte, we've got Allen Gray, we've got Nedbank. Those are very, very big corporate offices. EY, for example, you still have to get permission to go and work in the office. So has kept very closed. Allen Gray is about 50-50. So we are not seeing a consistent approach in who is back right now and who isn't back. And with the second wave, everything paused. We were told that people were going to come back in February, but that just went into a complete pause right now. So what we are seeing, if I had to look for something consistent, is that everybody is saying that they will come back. Some of them have required smaller space, some have not. That they want their offices, there will be the return of the office within the office. So they want much more private space. They want much more innovation space. They want much more space where you can get culture, and safety is imperative. But many haven't downsized. So if you take EY, for example, they were already hot desking. They already had built premises for fewer people. The other thing we're hearing in terms of this hybrid, which everybody's talking about, which is very complex, is that it's got to be very structured. It's about who will be in the office when, and it's not about a choice. So everybody is being completely consistent about needing a structured hybrid. Hybrid is complex. If you are in a company like the Waterfront Company where 70% of people are back or one person in a call is remote, it really doesn't work. So the hybrid, they're all speaking about structured days when people have to come in, and structured approaches. It's the types of work you should be doing at the office and the types of work that you should be doing at home, and then restructuring the office to fit to those kinds of work that are better done in an office space, including learning, which is a critical component of what happens informally in an office space. So that is probably a consistent thread. And they said that they came back because they believed they had a duty to keep the city going. So one of the companies that's been back from the beginning believes that the loss of jobs happening around cities was the reason that they needed to come back. Small players and medium players are completely diverse. Some are back, some are not. Some are back sometimes, some are back not. And the co-working spaces, interestingly, which you think should thrive in this time, are struggling. And one of the interesting things that's happening there, and I think it's an opportunity for the city, is we're getting a lot of foreigners in our co-working space who've managed to get into Cape Town some way, and they need to work. So that just gives you a broad view of what's happening. I think the critical systemic issue in my last sort of minute.
What time? You've got about 30 seconds more. Okay.
Yeah. So the systemic issues that have arisen from this are really the impact on us as a micro city, the impact on informal traders, the impact on our small businesses has been absolutely appalling, as you all know. That impacts security. Transport and mobility has been a plus, though there have been issues in getting secure transport to the premises and safety on transport. So energy consumption positively impacted, transport and mobility positive, security and job loss not. The systemic issues have to be part of this conversation. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Anne. That was great. I think particularly the whole not one size fits all, the granularity of having to approach this, and you can't just put everyone in one category and assume it's the same for everyone, and your differentiation in terms of age, gender, type of work, and inequality, and the space that you've got at home or your connectivity and things like that. And I'm sure we'll come back to those issues as well. Phumi, you are next.
Okay, we have to find the buttons around and move around. Hi everyone, sorry I was a little bit late. I think today I was impacted really with this blended approach model. I felt it. So I've prepared a presentation, in fact one slide that I wanted to share. So can't share, I'm unable to share.
Okay. Selwyn, do you want to change the security setting? You
have
good
just,
there? Yeah.
Just allowed sharing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I was introduced in absentia, but my name is Phumi Zamputi, commonly known as Phumi. I work for Distal as a GM Enterprise Applications. I'm a village girl through and through, which is very important for the angle that I would like to take. Also, I have spent my time staying in the township, so I understand the social impacts that the COVID had and the work from home challenges that it's bringing. So I started in Distal last year in February, just before the COVID lockdown hit. So I've experienced how it has been. So starting a new role, not just in a role or with as a senior and a leader in an organization is like became such a tough exercise, where I had to look deep down and understand the company strategy, the business processes, where do I fit, the technologies that we are supporting, and to say, where do I fit? Boom, when I looked, it was March and we were in lockdown. I could no longer be able to do the corridor talks, badging in people's offices where I could just say, what does that mean? You know, with ICT, with IT and acronyms, every word is an acronym. So it became such a very difficult thing for me. So I had to think as a person, what will it take for me in order to learn and to be able to still be productive in this environment? One of the challenges as well, while still faced with joining a new company, I had to look at working from home and homeschooling being a reality. Having a husband as well, and having to set up 2 offices in the house where we had meetings at the same time. We had to look at our children's calendars and everything. So that became a little bit of a challenge for me. Sorry, starting in a new job. So how did I tackle it, and how did this still enable me as an employee, but all the other employees as well? So we had to think, we had to think through business continuity. What will it take for Distal to still continue while we are in lockdown? So I think as Suki said, it has already been a mission. We had started the digital transformation, and as IT, we are enablers in the digital transformation. Overnight, we had to enable everyone to be able to work from home, and realizing that not everybody has got a laptop, not everybody has got not everybody has got data and connectivity where they're staying. So what does it mean for everyone? Over the night, we had to organize the transports and everything to make sure that we set up people in places that they stay in. Some people are staying in township where there's no electricity. What became of that? So we had to think and take a holistic approach and say, who for the people that are necessarily going to be working from home, how do we enable them? But also for people that do not have connectivity, how do we enable them? I think our leadership in HR has been very key in playing a big role in that, in ensuring that even the people that could that there were certain things that could be set up, or levels that we could set up to ensure that they are able to work, and there's connectivity that has been they've provided. There's something that's disturbing me. They've provided connectivity, but as a company, we needed to tap into our Distal values. One of those values being One Distal. How do we support our employees, knowing that they are impacted and affected in different ways? Either they have people that have COVID, they have COVID themselves, or affected and will not necessarily be able to work. So, and needed support. So I think as a manager and as a leader, I had to develop skills and found myself being a psychologist, find myself being a social worker, while also trying to get to understand the business and getting frustrated with the whole working from home. One of the, so building resilience became one of the key aspects of Distal. We created a number of programs that focusing on people themselves to say, how do we support you? How do we support the wellness of an individual? So we elevated programs like wellness programs. We created support systems, the body systems, the COVID-19 systems, where people could be able to support each other and be called. We had a number of speakers that came in and speak to our employees. We needed to keep the employees engaged in all aspects. We had, I think we have not seen the number of training that in years. We had our training and learning raised by over 166% in the past year, which means that we have managed to empower our people, keep them engaged while we're working in this mode. So where to from here? How do we define the new narrative, knowing the challenges that we have? Knowing and not knowing what the future holds. One of the key implementations that we've done is a blended work model, where somebody can be able to work from home, but also be able to have time in days that they work from the office. We have implemented technologies where one can be able to book a seat, but as Em said, it's not a fit for all. We need to think deep into that to say, some of the people might not necessarily be able to move with their desktops to in order to be able to fit into this blended approach. The people first. We need to focus on the people first. I think I've said I'm coming from the villages where the society or where communities are together and people are supporting each other. I think in this new world where we find ourselves mentally challenged, where we find ourselves spiritually challenged, we need to be each brother's keepers. We can use and tap in on the values that we used to grow up with from the villages and making sure that we care, because our employees are our assets, and so are we. Sorry, again, I'm trying. Our employees are our assets, and we need to make sure that their well-being comes first, because without them, we are not there or will not be there. So creating pipeline for the future. So I think this is a big topic, not just for Distal, but for the nation as South Africa in general, where we need to see and start looking at what are the future jobs and how do we define that, and how do we define that for the bigger society? How do we break from the university is the only way, but bringing the skills that could be future-proof. Distal has started on this, right, as I mentioned, that we've grown our learning to more than 166% of people are learning new technologies, as well as empowering themselves on different things. Through digital transformation, I think we're able to see and look at the future and see exactly where we're going, and in order to develop that pipeline of where we're going in the future jobs. Work-life balance. I think as I said today, I've got impacted so much by the blended work approach, where I had to wake up and didn't know everything where everything was. I think we've been the past year, I don't know who or how many hours we have spent on the meetings and expected to do the job at night, or the expectations that the jobs should still be done, or your work should still continue. So with the work-life balance, I think we need to look deep into that to say, what does it mean for each and every one of us? Create reality. And the reality doesn't start from where we were before. It starts from where we are right now. To say the status quo has changed to, we used to be in the office, and when you go to the office, it's going to be the same as it used to be. We still manage by calendars, and sometimes you go to office to change the environment, but you don't necessarily even get the time to build relationships and to talk, because it's a different status quo. So how do we create that life balance in order to make sure that even our children in our homes don't have a bad, we don't create a bad reputation of what the world of work looks like? Because I think right now it is working from home means that we have less time with our children or our families than we used to be. But the impact going to the world and going to the future is going to be it might be very dire, because they will see the world of work as different. But also we might be bringing up loveless children because we've got less time to spend with them. And that has got a social impact going forward. Develop for
Pumi, it's Andrew here. You need can you finish off in 30 seconds, please?
Okay.
Just watching our time. Thank you.
Developing future fit leadership. I think we need to hone on that, because we're no longer dealing with leaders that are watching seat warmers or bum seats. We're dealing with the society, with a virtual leadership that we need to be able to look at the leadership. So we need to look at the leadership differently. So the challenges that we need to be the challenges that we are now facing and that we need to look at is the social inequalities, because blended work is not a fit for all, is not going to be working fit for all. So the data connectivity, South Africa is still very expensive in terms of data, so not everybody can be able to afford that. The load shedding, what happens when we have load sheddings? The long working hours and the impact in our families is one of the challenges that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pumi. I think also your perspective as someone who had just joined a new company with a new role, and to be hit by COVID and suddenly working from home, how do you get to know your colleagues well? When normally in the office space, one gets inducted and introduced both formally and informally, but it's very hard. And I think people who've joined new businesses and new jobs in the last year must have been having a hell of a time. So thank you for that perspective, but also Distal's overall approach, which I think, the blended work model, creating future jobs, putting people first, finding a work balance, I think very helpful. And again, we'll come back to those themes as well. So let's get our final input from Sheila, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And remember, if you want to put any comments or points on the chat ahead of time, please do so as the audience. Thanks, Sheila.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. And thanks to my fellow panelists. I've been listening to what you've had to share, and I can hear parallels with all of your experiences and what we've gone through. I'm going to try and not repeat too much, but just to pull out some of the things that really stood out for us at Media 24 as we started with lockdown, as the COVID crisis hit, what we've taken from this and what we think we will take out of this in future. So if we go back a year, I can't believe it's a year, but it is, to where this first reached our shores, our first priority as a company and our bigger group, NASPAS, of which we're part, our first priority was to ensure that our people keep safe. And so our immediate response was to make sure that we had all the safety precautions in place and to do a BCP test. We sent everybody home before lockdown started and said, let's test this thing, let's see if we can actually do this. It went actually much more successfully than we could have anticipated, and lockdown came fairly shortly afterwards, and so we ended up having a lot of people who had gone home for a test actually just stay there. And that, as some of you have already said, was not true of everybody, because having essential workers as part of our business, there were some people like journalists, for example, who were out there from day one. They were out there covering the news and making sure that we could keep informed and keep our audiences informed. And so our big concern with them was, how do we keep them safe, and how do we make sure that people who are out there for their jobs, moving to public meetings, moving to press conferences and things like that, how do we make sure that they keep safe and that they know what to do to take care of themselves? And as we started to navigate this initial part, which I would call the survival part, how do we just make sure that we can keep the business running, make sure that everything gets done that needs to get done, and make sure that people keep safe? We were at the same time thinking strategically about what does this mean for the future of our business. And from a strategic perspective, we were, I suppose, in a fairly fortunate position that we had been on this journey of digital transformation for a long time. News 24 is 22 years old now, so we've been in the digital news business for a long time. And our plan had always been, as we saw the shifts in consumption patterns happening, to shift away from our printed publications more towards online, as audiences want to consume more and more of their news and entertainment online. And so lockdown really accelerated that for us. And we found that although we had been planning to migrate and in a very kind of measured way, migrate audiences to online, we found that it happened a lot quicker than we had anticipated. And that had both a positive and a negative side. The negative side was real job losses on our print media, in our print media business, which was hard, and I think particularly hard for people in such a tough economic climate. So we had to do a lot of work to provide support and to do what we could to try and mitigate and affect the effects of those job losses. But on the positive side, on the strategic side, it gave real momentum and impetus to our digital business. We saw huge audience growth, which is not always, unfortunately, equivalent to revenue, because advertisers don't necessarily want to put their advertising next to scary stories, but absolutely important for the growth of the business. And we've seen a complete shift in how people are wanting to consume news. We have, for example, been able to get to the point where people are actually willing to subscribe, where they're willing to make subscriptions and pay for news online, which is something that a year or so ago was extremely hard to get right. So from a business perspective, it's been a move in the right direction for us, but really accelerated by lockdown and by COVID more than anything else. If I think about the practical implications of lockdown, I've talked about the essential workers and keeping them safe and how that's been challenging and very important. But I think what we found with our people is, yes, there are some who can work from home and there are some who can't. We have staff working in warehouses, for example, and you just can't pick and dispatch from the comfort of your bedroom. You have to actually be in the warehouse to do that. So keeping those people safe, trying to make sure that they have safe ways into work, or at least don't travel at the most congested times in public transport, has been tough. And I think it's been particularly hard for them. They've often lived in communities that have been the most hard hit by COVID. They're living with the anxiety and the fear of that. And as much as what you try to provide a safe environment in the workplace, it's an anxious time for everybody. And that brings me to the topic of mental health and mental well-being. We talk about the COVID pandemic, but psychologists are also talking about the silent pandemic, which is the mental health pandemic that we're seeing right across the world. It's not just in South Africa. I've certainly seen it in our business, and it plays out in a few ways. The first one is that people who are already grappling with mental health issues, who may be prone to anxiety, may be dealing with other issues, have often found this exacerbated severely by COVID. partly because of a lack of access to their normal healthcare providers, partly because in some cases of additional anxiety because of the real environmental threats that they're experiencing. So that's been tough. And then of course, there have been many people who have been affected by COVID, who have lost close ones, lost family members, or had people who've been severely ill, and that's taken a tremendous toll. So as we've heard previously from the panel, one of our big focuses has been on wellness and trying to ensure that we provide that emotional and mental health support to people as we go through this together. And that's included using our employee wellness provider. We've had an arrangement with Careways for many years, and they've been wonderful. They've offered webinars for staff on things like coping with lockdown stress. We've had a webinar on dealing with grief, which was very well attended, and it's horrible that it should be very well attended, but clearly this is a need that people have. Making sure that we have extensions to our normal compassionate leave policy, just dealing with the reality that some people have lost 4 or 5 family members in a short space of time. You know, the normal family responsibility leave just doesn't cut it right now. So it's about sensitivity to that. It's about trying to make sure that people feel close and feel connected. And then it's about the return to office. So we have since October allowed return to office on a voluntary basis. For essential workers, as I said, they've been in and out all the time, basically the whole time. But for the rest, we've got, I would say, the majority of people still working from home, still choosing to work from home. But they have the option to come into the office, and we've encouraged, without making it mandatory at all, we've encouraged people to start thinking about doing that on a staggered basis. We're trying to limit the number of people in an office at any one time so that we can accommodate the social distance requirements. So we have staggered arrangements where people might come in on alternate days or mornings or afternoons, which is working quite well. And I have to say, speaking just as a colleague to people that I've last seen a year ago in some cases, it's so damn nice just to see them face to face. It's so nice to just have that human contact. And we've realized that, as I think Anne said earlier, managing culture is hard when you're all in your different places. It's really hard when you're not physically close together. And one of our biggest concerns really about how we manage through this and our sustainability going forward is, how do we make sure that we stay connected? How do we keep people connected to each other? How do we continue to build an inclusive culture? Our training team have stepped up fantastically. Shortly after lockdown started, they developed a program for managers, which was about managing remote teams, because it was suddenly a new set of skills. You know, this wasn't something that they'd mostly had to deal with before. So we put that in place, and that was very well received. They've taken that a step further now to develop a new program called Leading at the Pace of Change, which is there to help managers become more inclusive leaders, particularly, again, in the context that we find ourselves, where they probably won't anytime soon have everybody in the same room together. So I think what we'll take going forward is, firstly, we were a lot smarter at dealing with virtual meetings and connecting with each other online than we thought. But there's no substitute for real face-to-face contact. There's no substitute for actually being able to get together with your teams when you need to do that. And so we will probably have less office space in future, probably will have more people working on a kind of half home, half office kind of basis. And people love that flexibility. Those who have the flexibility do enjoy it. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that when we do that, we don't end up with a sort of half-baked hybrid that in the end doesn't work. When you have some people here and some people at home, and you're trying to have a conference call and everybody's crowded around one laptop on one side, you know, it becomes quite chaotic. So I think it's going to take quite a lot of careful thinking and planning to really make this new hybrid future of ours work properly. But I think it is going to be a hybrid future. I think it's never going to go back entirely to how it was. And there are definitely advantages to that. Having less congestion on the roads, having less pollution, it's friendly on the environment. All of those things are fantastic. But also acutely aware of the fact that according to where you live has a huge role in determining how good your experience of work from home is. And we found that many of our staff live in areas where connectivity is really poor. You know, you can give people data allowances all you like, but if the connectivity in your area is poor, it's a huge frustration to try and do your work every day. And there's a kind of and implicit discrimination almost that comes up there if you can't find some kind of way of helping people navigate that as well. So opportunities, yes, it's been tough, definitely. Many challenges that lie ahead. I don't think we've figured them all out yet, but it's really useful to have this opportunity to listen to what everybody else is doing and to share our progress as well. Thanks, Andrew. I think you're on mute, Andrew.
My dog was performing, so thanks so much, Sheila, and thanks to all four of our panelists. Really brilliant inputs. I mean, what came across to me, I mean, there's many common themes that have come across here, and I'd really like to open it up, and I'd also invite the panelists to look at what the various inputs that have started being made on the chat and to respond to those as well and engage with those. But in a sense, listening to companies as well as the waterfront precinct, as well as to the city of Cape Town, you were already on change journeys of one kind or the other before the crisis. It's not as though you were just comfortably sitting with business as usual, business as normal. You were wanting to have some sort of change, workplace, workforce combinations. But the crisis has accelerated change in ways that have been probably a year ago you couldn't imagine how the crisis has accelerated and disrupted your change processes for good and bad. And what's come across very strongly, and this is at the heart of a resilience theme, so I think this is the appropriate platform from the city resilience unit side. It's all about how do we respond to disruption through flexibility and adaptiveness. And if we in a company or in a city of Cape Town that has too many rigid rules, we're not going to be able to adapt and adjust quick enough to the complexity, the hybridity, the blended work. But I think, Anne, you made the point, is that flexibility and adaptiveness also still needs structure. And I think, Sheila, you kind of emphasized that point. It can't just be a free-for-all or survival of the fittest. It's got to be within a new structure that it adapts and responds to the need for flexibility and adaptiveness. So that's where some of the complexity has come in. I think all of you have raised the inequality issues, the systemic issues, the societal issues, the importance of leadership through processes of change and responding to a crisis, the importance of values. And then what's come out very strongly for me is the social impact. I mean, Pumi, you talked about how do you escape work when it's in your home, when it's at work, when it's at home, and the difficulty of not just working long hours, 24/7, you're owned by the company. There's no escape. And you're doing it on your cost at home. In a way, it's a big challenge. And so your work-life balance. And Chile, the mental health pandemic, which we've probably underestimated and don't fully understand yet, and it'll take years. I mean, one could probably look at post-traumatic stress disorder of this pandemic in 5 years' time when it starts coming out, which tends to be the timeframes for a lot of issues to emerge. And then ultimately, the point that I think you've all made is that human contact and connectivity ultimately is physical. Very hard to have digital contact of a meaningful type. It works for efficiencies. Zoom meetings can be brutally clinically efficient, and that's probably good for some types of work, taking decisions, getting everyone on board and moving ahead. But I mean, the world of work is more than just efficiencies. And it strikes me that maybe we're underestimating the degree to which people will want to return to business as normal at places of work because they miss the human contact. I mean, apart from the things that drive them away from working at home, which is really difficult conditions for many people, and the need to escape your family once in a while also. And you know, that human connectivity is something that we crave and that we are missing. And people may want to voluntarily come back to work in the same old way very quickly. So I'm just putting that out there as a discussion point. But let's open it up for firstly, any of you want to raise, come in from the participating audience. Just look at the reaction button and raise your hand so I can see that. Or if any of our panelists want to respond to any of the points raised on the chat, Albert has raised a point about remote working and the impact on people with disabilities, if there's any particular points that you'd like to make there. A point about a couple no longer waking up on a random Wednesday morning and playing loud gospel music. They can't do that anymore. I like that point. And the point about, is remote working exacerbating social inequality? And then, yeah, technology issues, particularly ESCOM and load shedding tools, the cost of data. Yeah, any comments? Zukiswe, do you want to come in now, please?
Yes, I think on the point Albert raised on the impact to staff with disabilities. So within the city, we've had experiences where both some of the employees from our disabled community of employees are saying that working from home has been much better because the support system is there, and I was able to be productive better than when I was in the office. And in some cases, you find line managers saying, no, come back to work because the nature of what you do requires you to be here. And on the other hand, you've got certain employees who are having a negative experience, all of us using virtual, meeting through virtual meetings. And those who are hearing impaired have come up to say, not everyone can lip read, and audio is not always good. So we had to dig deep around what other tech enablement can we put in place to ensure that we support them. For instance, MS Teams have got a live capturing of the audio itself so they can read what you're saying in the screen, but not all organizations have got those tools. So as a city, we had to ensure that we understand what the needs are and respond accordingly, because not all of them have the same needs. But also I think it's a matter of, as line managers, being mindful and actually ensuring that we do check and not take it for granted that whatever provisions are there will work. Because really, as we've said, that it's not one size fits all, but it's important to listen and be able to talk to the community and understand what their needs
are. Thanks, Kiswe. There's a particular follow-up with Anne on this question. Is the Waterfront looking at converting some office space to other users or adapting for SMME use or residential use? So that's an additional point that has come in there. Any other contributions, including from our panelists? Or
sorry, hand.
Yeah. No, go for it then. That's fine. There's no other hands up, so you're not jumping the queue there, so that's fine.
Forgot about those dots at the top of the Zoom. So I think I just want to answer this question in the context of the question for the city as well. I mean, we are looking, we're constantly looking at the use and use patterns in terms of the split between residential, etc. We are making a major push to support SMMEs and using some of our space to create clusters and hubs for SMMEs, and we launched something for food SMMEs. So we are constantly looking at that use. We feel it's too early to look at mass conversion because we don't know where this is going to fall out. But I think I wanted to ask a question, I guess, to the city specifically, because we've been talking sort of office by office, but the collective impact of companies not being in the city is an impact on restaurants, informal traders, parking tenants, and we see that same impact in the waterfront. And cities around the world sort of have a strategic direction about whether they want to pull companies back in or don't want to pull companies back in. And there are many looking at incentive structures, etc., because otherwise cities are going to die. So I guess I have a question from the city at a resilience or strategic level, aside from your employees, the concerns around the city itself dying, which you only need to walk around Bree and Loop and the rest and you see what's happening. We've tried to deal with the precinct dying by huge amounts of rental relief, even working capital relief, creating long-term plans, strategic plans with our tenants to try and keep the precinct going. So that's just another question that I have, Andrew.
Thanks, and I think I don't know if there are any of our city planners on the call, but it does speak to the future shape of our city, because in a sense the hub and spoke arrangement, which is exacerbated by the position of the sea, the geography of the mountain and things like that, meant that our centralized nodes were being choked off by lack of public transport and the sort of growing rush hour. Rush hour has been growing at 10 minutes a year over the last 20 years. So, and will continue to do that. So it'll take 3 or 4 hours if we return to business as usual. And I suppose it's a question of, does one continue to support the notion of centralized business nodes? And there's 70 of them in the city. It's not just the CBD. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are of more primary importance, and others are secondary and tertiary importance. But there's about 70 business and commercial and industrial nodes in Cape Town. And obviously, if you add in Stellenbosch and Drakenstein and places like that, it gets even more. And does one have a policy of decentralization of work, not necessarily to home, but to decentralized nodes to ease the transport? Or do you, in a sense, encourage coming back to the centralized business nodes, but then you've got to deal with the transport issue that was killing us before the pandemic? So happy to engage with that issue if it's out there, and any other issues. So I'm just picking up on the variable impact of load shedding in areas on households complicates working from home, different downtimes in different areas. Yeah, absolutely. How many times have we been on a meeting, a Zoom meeting, and people say, sorry, I can't get on because I'm about to lose power? And is it the employee's responsibility to put in sort of uninterrupted power supply, or is that something the company pays for at home? Where's the incidence of cost in all of this? Is it transferred? Because normally if you're working from the office, the company pays for an uninterrupted power supply or generator or something like that, or batteries, systems. Do employees have an obligation to put that in place if they want to work from home or have to work from home to make sure that they can connect? Where's the structure in that? I think these are some interesting questions. I don't know if HR departments or finance departments of companies have been faced with this, but why should employees pay for company business? For me?
I think there's a comment from Raquel Bennett. I think today for me is one of the signs or the examples of what the blended work model is, or working between home and work looks like. It's the anxiety that, you know what, you're going to wake up in the morning, you're not used to wake up in the morning, what am I going to wear? Things that we wouldn't necessarily be looking at. And noting that without even thinking about the weight that I've gained, what am I going to wear? The traveling between all the way 45 minutes to Stellenbosch. It creates an anxiety, and you get here, you still have this standard calendar that you had that would be practical when you're not traveling and working from home. And then I think your day gets like really a little bit crazy and messed up. But what we've done and what we're doing in order to deal with some of the, in fact, maybe before that, the blended work approach, I think we need a human element. We need to see people, but also you create a different environment where you can meet people. You can do something different and declutter as well. because I think if we honest enough, sometimes it's really frustrating to work from home for a number of reasons. You just need to get a different environment and then get back to the cycle. But what we've done, or we're trying to implement from my team perspective, for an example, is to say we create a downtime period for each one of us, mostly from the management level, because we find that we are in meetings the whole day and we don't have time to perform our jobs. Then what we do is to create half an hour, like 3 hours in a week, where it's dedicated to do admin. So during that period, any one of us will have to represent you in the meetings that you are going to have. That also creates better relationships to stay connected with our people and making sure that we really are in touch and know what each and everyone is doing. So I think it's one of the options. The meetings is really a big problem. But also I think technology like Microsoft, you can have set your meetings to be 45 minutes and then get a 15 minutes break where you can be able to go stretch a leg and do some other things. But I think in general, the work from home model needs to really be looked at. It's in order to create life balance, because right now it's so very tilted. It's 100%, in fact 120% working. Even on weekends, we need to start catching up on the things that we didn't catch on during the week.
Thanks, Pumi. Any other comments or inputs or questions? Because now is your time. I mean, I think what certainly, given the inputs and given the questions, and Elric, is that you want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. I'm from the city, working in the fleet department. I think it's also, for me, I think that, you know, in our culture we would think, you know what, that the man goes out to work and the woman will look after the kids and raise the kids. But I think that dynamic also has changed. I find myself, for example, when my wife goes into work often, every day actually, and then I have to work from home, but the kids are also around because the schooling system is such that they go to school every second day. So it's a system where sometimes I have 2 kids, 2 boys. So sometimes the high school one will have to go on a Monday, and the primary school one will have to go on a Tuesday. And it's that school run. It's sitting with the homework, because also now, I don't know if there's teachers on this panel, but I find that I'm a teacher as well now. Something interestingly that I found was the teachers would give work to do. So there's a lot of work that they just push onto the parents now. And I not just have to help the kids with the homework, prepare the kids for the test, but I also have to mark the work myself. So it becomes that scenario. And in the meantime, I'm in meetings, lots of meetings, lots of action, lots of stuff that needs to be done. But, you know, I do find, and I also share the sentiment with Fumeza, where I've also picked up a lot of weight because there's really not enough time, I would say, to have that downtime, because there's a lot of things that you need to catch up with, you know. Also, when my wife comes home, then I must be the husband again. And that is also not easy. So, and also it's asked, you know, when she steps in, what are we having for dinner, you know, and it's just all of that dynamic. It's just a lot. And I think we need to really think hard about, you know, ways to overcome all of these things. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Elric. Thanks for putting it honestly out there. I mean, I think that the sort of questions you're facing in your relationship at home is something that most women face every day of their lives. So it's quite good, in a sense, the shoe's on the other foot, and maybe it is a way of changing gender relations at home. And maybe that's one of the positives that have come out of the crisis, where men can learn the tough things of working from home, like so many women face. And the physical health side, I think quite a few of you have mentioned that as well. And I think the brutal efficiency of team meetings and Zoom meetings, one after the other, when in a sense you can finish your work in half a day, but then you're so exhausted from endless meetings and sitting still. I mean, I have an Apple Watch that tells me that I haven't got up twice in the last hour, but I can't because I'm chairing this Zoom session. So I feel trapped here, and it's affecting my physical health. So these are complicated things. And I think that one of the definitions of complexity is there's a whole lot of unknowns. Because if you know all the components of a moving part, you can kind of work on it and fix it or address it. But when there's a whole lot of unknowns and dynamics that we still don't understand how they all fit together, it's very hard to then predict the future. And what I'm hearing, I mean, I may be wrong, this is just my impression from the questions that people have put forward and from our people on the panel, is that working from home is not all that it's cut out to be. And it's quite hard to make it successfully work. And maybe the old division between home and work will come back into bear quite soon once the workplace is completely safe. And it'll be I don't know if anyone is looking at any data from, say, United States, where they've moved very rapidly in their vaccination program, and whether people are returning to work in droves once they've got the jab. In a sense, because they're going to be a year ahead of us in terms of timing around that. Anne, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, so in terms of people going back to work in their droves after the vaccination, that isn't happening. It's very preliminary research in the US. Interestingly, in spite of what we're all saying, all of which I agree with, the biggest global study, which was a massive study, didn't include South Africa, but US and Europe, showed that 82% of people prefer to work at home, not all the time, but a blended model, which is more or less what's being shown here in the surveys that have been done. So I'm not all these problems exist, but it still seems like the majority of people don't want to go back to work full time. So it is interesting, but I also think what you said earlier, that it's too early to say. You know, that research may be different in a year's time when you've had 2 years at home. You
Yes.
maybe can't wait to get back to the office. So I think it is too early to know, and there are too many unintended consequences that we don't understand yet.
Okay. And maybe, and also what you said about, you know, maybe it's not just about where you work from. Maybe it will be a blend of home and office, but how many hours you spend in each place. And the notion of returning to 9 to 5, sort of clock in, clock out type of thing, maybe that has fundamentally changed because people see that that's not very productive, especially if you've got to face 2 hours on the traffic getting there and 2 hours on the traffic getting back. That just does not make sense.
Yeah, it's what you do at work that's changing, and why you would go there that would change permanently.
So what work is best suited to a collective environment, common environment, a workspace environment, whether that's centralized or decentralized, and what works better from home. And certainly home can be very efficient if you're working on the types of things that lend itself to working at home. More research-based stuff works well. You know, if you can keep your kids out or your dogs out or whatever it is, your partner. Okay, Albert, do you want to say anything more about some of the city planning stuff? You made some interesting comments there, and Louise has asked if you want to share anything more there.
Hi, yeah, just a quick note. I was just thinking we need to think about actually having 50 minutes or 55 minutes meetings, by the way, each hour. I think I've just been the level of running to get coffee and all of that, and just having a mental break in between, it's actually perhaps something we need to think about. Yeah, so just a quick note on the CBD recovery program, as it's now known. It was launched last year August officially launched in October by Alderman Foss, but the planning kind of started in mid-July last year, with the focus to really think about short-term interventions to quote-unquote kind of stop the bleeding within the CBD. But we have recently engaged with broadening the conversation. Yes, we still need short-term interventions around precinct management, safety, cleaning, that kind of stuff, but really talking about what does the CBD look like in the future. So we've added the element of considering the transition within the CBD. So what we're really going to focus on is the planning around the transition. So over the next 2 years or so. And then we are also broadening it to consider the CBD and surrounding areas, because the CBD obviously affects as a metropolitan level impact. And then just focusing on some of the planning that is happening, within the foreshore area, for example, within the waterfront, within the East City, that kind of thing. It's kind of a porous border approach. Obviously, we have a focus space. But at this point, we kind of say in the next 2 months or so, we'll be finalizing some of the planning work that we're doing internally, and then we'll be starting to engage with partners. So it's not that the program has been ongoing, but we are kind of reinvigorating it and looking into the long-term future as well. So it's kind of what I can share at the moment, but I'll definitely our team will be in touch with a lot of people on the line currently, to form part of the kind of stakeholder engagement that we are working with. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert. I mean, I would be interested, just in terms of what you've said, what the response of the people who own commercial property, which effectively are in the business of letting out space for work, and whether they are, in a sense, just wanting to claw back what they've lost, which has been considerable, and go back to business as usual as quickly as possible, or whether they are thinking of new and adapted uses of space for a better blend of work and non-work spaces together, including residential and retail, and whether office towers become redundant or not, whether it affects how you design buildings in future. I think it's going to have a profound impact on not just the city planning aspects, but on the design of buildings, and whether that changes at all. And we move away from kind of the monofunctional high-rise buildings, or corporate headquarter type of spaces. I know in the United States, quite a few of the big corporates that used to own the big buildings downtown are now trying to get out of those leases and shifting to a number of smaller decentralized business nodes to support their employees coming into work, but closer to home. So there's a bit of a blend there. I don't know if that's going to come here. I know that the Western Cape Property Forum has a thing on in about a month's time that I've asked to speak at on some of these issues. So that'll just be an interesting angle of city space, which is partly a function of city planning, but it's also partly a function of the market and how the market responds to both challenges and new opportunities here. So that'll be an interesting part of the process. And I think, the waterfront is a microcosm, a precinct microcosm of some of the bigger challenges that property owners and commercial property developers face. And I'd be very interested to see whether they have given some thought to new ways of approaching property development in the future based on the crisis. Colleagues, we kind of on time here. I don't know if there's any final comments that anyone would like to make. But I wouldn't like to keep us from the bathroom break or the smoke break or the coffee break before the next meeting. So I'm in the absence of any other hands, I'm happy just to firstly, on behalf of everyone, to thank our 4 speakers and to thank the city and the EDP team for co-hosting this. I think it's been fascinating, and I think it's been it certainly opened my eyes to how complex and how intertwined these societal, social, physical, planning, emotional, and value-based issues are. You can't separate them out. And it's not just a question of the technology that supports this. It's got to be thought through at a human level as much as at the technology level. And so just to thank you all for your participation. I'm sure this is just the start of an ongoing conversation about how we evaluate the impact of this pandemic and this crisis on the world of work, and the people that work and the people that don't work, and where we're going to work in future. So thanks, everyone, and look forward to the next Futurecasting discussion.
Thanks, Andrew. If I can just mention to everybody, the next Futurecasting discussion will be on the green economy, and that's on the 21st of April, and we'll be communicating that to everybody shortly. Thank you to everybody for participating. Okay. Goodbye.
Thanks, Selwyn.